Hi everyone, welcome to Python for Academics. In this video I will show you how to run Python scripts with different parameters set directly from the command line. This example can be very useful when you have to run post-processing of your research results with various sets of parameters, but you don't want to modify your Python script every time that you do that. So instead you can populate these parameter values directly from the terminal commands by setting up an appropriate terminal command. So imagine that you need to train a neural network with various parameters such as different input variables, number of epochs, learning rate, maybe initialization of the weights in the network, and maybe you also want to run this across a couple of changing random seeds. So a naive way to do that in Python is to hard code these parameters just like we have done here, and then execute the script from the command line. So if I run this exact Python script, you can see that we have the values of the parameters are populated from these hard-coded values over here. So for example, 1000 is the number of epochs, gloret uniform is the initialization, and then if you want to run the same script with different values of parameters, or maybe you want to change the number of epoch to 200, and maybe you want to change this to a random uniform initialization, you can now go back to the terminal, run the script again, and you can see that the number of epochs have changed, the initialization have changed. But maybe you don't want to have to modify this script every time because maybe you have it under version control. You don't want to accidentally inject errors into that script by modifying it. So today we are going to use a Python library that's called argparse, and that will help us to update these parameter values in a smarter way without the need to modify the script. And here I have a copy of that script, but I prepared it in such a way that will populate these 5 different parameters from the command line. So the first thing is to import the argparse library. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to define this function that is going to parse our input parameters, our input arguments. So I'm going to call this argument parser. And now we instantiate this object of the argument parser class that comes from this argparse library, argument parser. And now we can simply add arguments to this parser object. So we use the add argument function on that parser object, and now we can add all of these 5 arguments to this parsing function. So the first one is called input variables, and we add it as a string, and we add these 2 dashes out front, which is a standard way to process arguments for a terminal command. And this one is going to be of type integer, so this is an integer type variable, and the default that we can set over here is actually going to be a list of integers because we can have many input variables. Let's say that in this example we have 10 possible variables that can become input to the neural network, but maybe with different scenarios we're going to run the neural network training with just a couple of those. And the way that we can tell this argument parser that we can have more than one integer value is by setting this nargs parameter to this plus, and this will allow us to input more than one integer value. And then we can generate this little help string that if we execute the help command, it's going to give us back some information about what this particular variable is. So maybe we're going to say that these are indices for the input variables. Okay, so the next variable that we're going to add to this parser is called the number of epochs. Again, we format this as a string and we add these 2 dashes out front. And this one is also of type integer. The default value, let's say we're going to set this to 1000. And then the little help string that will generate, let's say this is number of epochs. The next argument is called the learning rate. And this one is actually a float value. So the type here is float. Let's say the default, maybe we're going to set it to 10 to minus 3, and the little help information is the learning rate, which is an important parameter in a neural network. So the next argument is called initializer, and this one is of type string. So the default value is going to be glorot uniform, which is a typical default for initialization of the weights in the neural network, and the little help is initialization of weights. And the last one, the last argument that we're going to parse is going to be called random seeds, which is going to populate these 2 values, so the minimum and maximum random seed. And this one is of type integer as well. I'm just going to format this nicely. And the default is also a list of 2 integers, so the minimum and maximum random seeds. So we again have to specify that we can have more than 1 integer value, and the little help box is going to be min maximum random seed. Okay, and at the end of this function, because remember we wrapped this whole with a function, we're going to return this parser object. So now we're going to capture this parser object by actually executing this function, argument parser, and we're going to parse those arguments. So we're going to, that's parser, we're going to call this function parse arguments, and we can also print these arguments just so that we have some debugging information, with what values have they been run at a given training instance. And now we have to populate these values for these 6 variables, but instead of hard coding them like we did in this script, we are going to extract them from this argument parser. And the way that we can do that is by using this vars built-in function in Python on the arguments, on the args, this args variable that we generated over here. And this actually returns a dictionary where the keys are the names of the arguments, the strings, and the values are the values for those parameters. And since this is a dictionary, we can also now call this get method and find what is the value for this parameter input variables. And we're just going to do the same thing for all of these other variables. So I'm just going to copy all of that code over here. And for this last one, this last variable is called random seeds. And since this is a list of 2 elements, I'm actually going to convert that to a tuple just so that I can populate these two values, minimum and maximum. So the first element will become the minimum random seed, the last element will become the maximum random seed. Okay, so now with this script, we can try executing it in the command line. And if we run it like this, you can see that we first get some information about what were the values for all of these 5 parameters. And this is coming from this print statement over here, where we print the arguments out. And then we essentially get the same output coming from the remainder of that script as we did before. So now when we've run this script, it actually used the default values because we didn't specify any other values for those parameters. But now what you can do is you can actually set different values for all of these 5 variables, and we can do that by using the names of all of those variables with the double dash out front. So let's say that we're going to test it out where the input variables are 0 and 8. Maybe the number of epochs is going to be 400. Maybe we're going to change the learning rate as well to 0.1. And we're going to change the initialization to something different. So let's use random uniform, and we're going to use random seeds from, let's say, 0 to 5. And if we run it that way, then you can see that the values for all of these parameters have changed. Now we have 400 epochs instead of 1000 epochs, or the random uniform initialization instead of the gloret uniform, and we're looping over just 5 random seeds instead of 10 random seeds. So using argparse is a safer way to execute your Python script with varying parameters, because you can keep your original Python script under version control, for example on GitHub, and now you don't need to modify the content of that script anymore. And this also prevents you from accidentally injecting some mistakes into your script by modifying it. And from now on, you can simply run the same script and update its parameters from the command line. And the last thing that I want to show you is viewing the help option for this particular Python script. So if you run this Python script with this -h parameter, then you will get some help information back in the terminal that tells you some extra information about all of these 5 input variables. And notice that the information that you get is exactly the one that we generated here with this help argument. So for example, for this parameter, we get the help information that those are indices for the input variables. And this is exactly what we have over here. So in the next video, I will extend this example and show you a smart way to handle Boolean values using argparse. See you then.